All right, well, let's rock and roll into it. You ready?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Welcome to the worst of the best podcast. You wanted the best. Well, they didn't freaking make it. So here's what you get. From Canada, Ryan and Ruben.
All right, welcome to the Worst of the Best podcast. I'm your host, and with me again today, joining us to fill in for Ruben, who has obligations to attend, is Drew. You may have heard him. He guest host on the only two Third Eye Blind episodes. He was an amazing guest host then, and he also guest host on last week's Matt Damon. Certainly not a downsized episode, supersized episode of Matt Damon. Today we are doing, speaking of bigger than life, larger than life, we are doing wrestlers, the top wrestlers of the 1980s. And we're talking, of course, the only wrestlers that matter, the WWF or WWE wrestlers of the 1980s. We're going to talk about what they mean to us, why they're in the best list, and however, as per the rules of this show, if you're a first-time listener, maybe you're here because you're a wrestling fanatic, so you came to listen to an episode about wrestling. The way this show works, we don't pick the best. No. We only pick the worst from that best. Even amongst the best wrestlers of the 80s, there is somebody, for some reason, that is the worst. All right, Drew, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me back again. Thanks for bringing me in only to speak about my most enthusiastic nerdisms, things that really get me going from a hobby standpoint. We've talked about Third Eye Blind. We've talked about the great Will Hunting. I'm sorry, his name is Matt Damon. Mm-hmm. And now we're going to talk about some grapplers from the 80s. Nothing could be better. No better way to spend my time.
That's awesome. What's your earliest memories of wrestling, and what got you hooked on the wrestling? Especially because you're a little bit younger than me, right?
Yeah.
What gives you the authority to speak about 80s wrestlers?
Unfortunately, I spend way too much time going back and watching the WWE Network. I spend way too much time listening to, there's only about 85% of the podcast market is dedicated to professional wrestling. As I am commuting around the town, I'm listening to, the great voices of wrestling of our age. I'm listening to Conrad Thompson, Bruce Pritchard. I'm listening to Eric Bischoff. I'm listening to Tony Schiavone. I'm listening to David Shoemaker and Peter Rosenberg. These guys keep me up to date, not just with what's going on now, but take me back in time for that nostalgia. For a lot of us, wrestling is our nostalgia fix. Similar to music, maybe similar to some TV shows that you might watch. Even though I was a very, very, very small child during the 80s, these wrestling moments from the 80s, they still strike me as having that same value. Whether or not I watched the pay-per-view live or whether or not I remember that I watched it live or not. What about you? What was your experience growing up with wrestling in the 80s?
And I only ask that because I think you're 8 or 9 years younger than me. I will say, not to brag, but I got to live as a child and a teenager through the best time in the movies, music. Born in 75. So when WrestleMania 3 came out, I was 8 years old. I was like, are you kidding me? It was the talk of the town. Andre the Giant pulling off that Hogan's Cross in Piper's Pit. That was unreal. We couldn't believe it. We went to school the next day saying, can you believe Andre turned heel, man? It broke my heart. As a child, it broke my heart. Wrestling has been in my blood as a young child when it was happening live. My mother would let us watch Saturday Night's Main Event. And yeah, this is like the early days. This is pre-Raw, of course, pre-SmackDown, but this was their version of SmackDown and Raw back in the day with Saturday Night's Main Event. And it felt like pay-per-view back when I was a kid. We were young, so my mom, bless her heart, she would let us nap. So we'd go to bed at 7, 8 o'clock at night, and then she would wake us up at midnight to watch this locally on our TV.
Oh, the best mom ever.
Yeah, no kidding. Saturday night's main event, it was like Christmas morning. I think we were more excited about the main event than Christmas of these tender years. And then just seeing the heroes of yesteryears, Junkyard Dog and Roddy Piper, and I'm talking about these undercard guys, the Bumblebee twins. What were they called again? The Killer Bees, the British Bulldog.
Yep. B. Brian Blair.
But then, of course, we'll get into the big names. So as a young kid, wrestling was everything. And I was a mark in that I truly believed it was real. It didn't even occur to me. I was young. Like, I probably still believed in Santa when I was 8 years old. To me, seeing these men beating the crud out of each other, I was fooled. I thought they were hitting each other. I had no idea that things were scripted. I had no idea what sports entertainment was. This was wrestling. These were men who were fighting for the title. They were just as betrayed as we were when they turned heel and things like that. Yeah, it wasn't until I forget what age I was, but I remember my dad kind of telling me, like, it's not real. And I think I know what he was saying as an adult. But as a child, I didn't understand what that meant, because I would say to him, I remember being so defensive, or not defensive, but defending what I saw, saying as a young child, saying, "Oh, Dad, they're hitting. You can't fake flying through the air," I would say. You can't fake those things. And I was trying to wrap my head around what he was trying to say, but now I know he was saying that it was scripted, that the outcome was predetermined before they entered the ring. That they're...
Oh, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it.
I know.
I'm kayfabe only. Kayfabe only.
Stop. So we might have some listeners like, what's kayfabe? What's a mark?
You said at the age of 8, you were talking about somebody turning heel. Now,
Right.
did you really say that?
No, not at 8.
You said he's a bad guy.
He's a bad guy. Yes. Sorry. Yeah, I'm retconning history a little bit because, I didn't know those terms. To know those terms would indicate that this is not true.
Sure. That you were wizened up, that you had been taken to school, that you understood the jargon as they did it, and you could, you could speak the kayfabe, so to speak, that you understood that it was all a work.
So what's happened to me in my adult years, ironically, I think this probably speaks to a lot of the adults who were raised on wrestling, and you, of course, for the Attitude Era, which would be a different episode. Once we kind of knew behind the curtain, so to speak, what became interesting to me as a fan is the shoots, the behind the scenes, the real life feuds. I then got knee deep into the biographies, the Mick Foley biographies and the Rock biographies, and every scrap of morsel that they would dare throw our way of the things that were real. That was the irony, is when are we being worked and when is it real? When is it a shoot? Hearing the behind the scenes stuff and hearing these, of course, these podcasts and how the Montreal Screwjob, all these things, is just fascinating to me. And so, ironically, it's taken on a different life. But I think the flip side of that is wrestling today will never have the magic of the Attitude Era in the 80s, because we are too wise to it. And so it's a kind of a conundrum they've done to themselves, is we know how the cookie's made, but now we want to see the cooks fight in the kitchen, not eat the cookie.
In the years since kayfabe has died, whatever year you might want to say that happened, they play around with how much do they want to give us. Do they want to work the boys as they do, meaning that they would tell a story that only 3 people know about, like the Montreal Screwjob? Or do they want to lean into the athleticism, which is what it seems like they do now, which is to say, look, obviously the stories are predetermined, but you can't fake flying through the air and landing on somebody. Right. You can't fake, what is very obviously bodies colliding in great athleticism. You can't fake a 560 flip or whatever you might say. That seems to be the way that they go now. And there's reasons for that. It's the death of kayfabe. It's the death of people that are willing to live the gimmick as it is. It's the end of all of the wrestlers going around pretending like they hate each other even when they're at Burger King. But then the other thing is high definition television. You thought that they were hitting each other. Ask yourself, what was the TV you were watching on? Right. The TV that you were watching on might have been black and white. I don't want to make any claims about how old you may be versus how old I am, but I watched wrestling on black and white in some of my earlier years. I know that sometimes just your grandfather is watching wrestling, but he has it on. Yeah, you can't tell whether they're hitting each other or not. Yeah. on a black and white TV. HD is much different. So they've got to do different things. From my standpoint, I try to keep myself educated on that sort of very interesting backstage stuff like you do, or not just what wrestlers did, but why they did certain things and sort of the backstage stuff that may or may not have been told at the time, but it's been come out recently. I'll tell you a couple of sources that I rely on would be, and you talked about some of the things that you would read out there. I don't know if you ever read any dirt sheets. You ever read any dirt sheets?
Explain to the listener what those are.
A dirt sheet would just be wrestling rumors.
Right.
A dirt sheet would be unofficial newsletter of things that a person who may or may not call themselves a reporter, may or may not call themselves a journalist, but this person happened to be backstage and they talked to the boys. Right. One of the boys said this, or one of the promoters said that. And then you publish that in the dirt sheets because that's an indicator of what really happened, not what they put out on TV, but did somebody get in a fight with somebody? Did somebody steal somebody else's girl? Did somebody betray sort of some of the backstage ethics that may have been in play at the time? And is that why something happened or didn't happen? During the 80s, as we're talking about, those things often had as much to do with politics or backstage sort of presentation as it did out on the stage or in the ring. The dirt sheets are a way to do that. I've relied on, for my research, some things that may be called dirt sheets, things like the Wrestling Observer by Dave Meltzer, 1982. It's a weekly newsletter that talks about upcoming plans and why things happen and what's going to happen and why it didn't. I've also relied on the longest currently published English language wrestling publication, which is called Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Pro Wrestling Illustrated has been on newsstands since 1979. And it's usually the one that you would go to pre-internet to get really cool pictures of your favorite muscly, oily, head bandanaed hero, right? But it also does do things like they have votes for Wrestler of the Year, Match of the Year. They give accolades. Those accolades are some of the ways that you determine who are the best and who are the worst.
Okay, well, let's get into it. Let's get into the list. We'll draw from those feelings on the character, what it meant to you as a child or later years, and who they were to you.
You know that some of these guys on our list did not wrestle for the WWF or the WWE.
Yeah, you're right. And that's true. When I was a kid, I only knew about the WWE and WWF. It wasn't until the Attitude Era and the internet that I was able to investigate and look at the other regions.
You should call them promotions.
Promotions, thank you. Well, we'll get to those individuals that didn't fight during the 80s at least. Everyone's had their time in the WWE or WWF since then. When I watched wrestling, there's a couple of people on this list that did not fight that I ever saw on screen. But I heard about them by reading other wrestling magazines as a kid. I'd be like, who is that individual? Why is he so popular? Why? Because he's not in the WWE. And I didn't understand about promotions in region areas where wrestlers were popular in, Southwest USA, for example.
You can pretty much put together like any combination of a noun and a direction and then some sort of synonym for the word group, and you've come up with a wrestling promotion. Mid-South Wrestling, All Wrestling Association, Pacific Federation of Wrestling. It just runs the whole gamut because there were hundreds for a short time or for a time prior to the sort of emergence of the World Wrestling Federation under Vince McMahon Jr. in the mid-'80s. There are some wrestlers that even after that happened in the mid-'80s still resisted sort of the urge or the need to go to Vince McMahon's promotion.
I like what I see here. These are the big boys of, this is about as big as it gets. I'm sure there'll be people that disagree with our top 10. I think this is about as big as it gets.
They'll give us their input in the comments section. Is that right?
I hope so. That'd be great. We'll start with number 10.
Yeah.
King Kong Bundy.
King Kong Bundy.
I remember when King Kong Bundy entered the scene. Of course, I don't have the stats in front of me as to when he entered, but I remembered he was a nemesis to Hogan, of course. He seemed larger than life. He was kind of a gross-looking guy, whereas some of the wrestlers weren't gross-looking. He was a good heel. He was kind of big and hulked around and had his arms out with that invisible lat syndrome, walking around with his kind of gut. But he was tough, and he would bleed from the head, which was always gross for me as a kid. I had a hard time with the blood. I was never a fan of that. I'm not a fan of that style of wrestling where when the wrestlers, of course, now we know they cut themselves a little mini blade on their forehead. But as a kid, I thought they truly broke their head open on the steel matches or whatever.
You always wondered how everything was so sharp in the ring that they were in, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I love how they split their head open, but they never got a bump on their head in the process. I never connected those dots, that they would cut their skin open, but they would never have a lump on their head.
It was weird how they all knew how to do that. It was like they were geniuses in a very specific science.
So, yeah, King Kong Bundy and Hogan had a great cage match, and I think Bundy did cut his head open, if not both of them, for that match.
I believe that they were really leaning on blood in that era. It was something they were in that big blue cage. You remember that one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Funny enough, I had some wrestling toys, and I had a King Kong Bundy toy, and that stretchy kind of plastic rubber toy that they have with the wrestlers. They kind of bounce off each other. They're the size of a Barbie doll. I loved my King Kong Bundy, so I kind of had a soft spot for the old Bundy there because I had a toy of him that I grew attached to, even though in the ring he was kind of But that's a sign of a good heel, right? You love to hate him.
If you were going to get those toys, you needed to get a good guy and a bad guy. You needed to have two to fight each other. And so they always sort of made sure to make the appropriate amount of good guys and bad guys so that Hulk Hogan could beat up on King Kong. And if you needed to, you could, face Hulk Hogan against another bad guy once you got another one, whoever that might be. So I totally understand that. Whoever it was, they made you a bad guy and you got a bad guy.
So here's a clip of Bundy. As many of you know, he wasn't a big talker, but this clip here was from his later time in the WWF. So Mean Gene is the interviewer here that we're going to hear.
Well, it might be a little more than 468. This guy just whistled through 4 plates of Eggs Benedict. King Kong Bundy, welcome back to New Haven.
Little man, wouldn't it make a lot more sense to call me King Kong Bundy, 6'5" tall, 468 pounds? Call me Mr. Wonderful instead of some sawed-off little runt like Orndorff. You know something, Orndorff? What's the most devastating move? What's the great move that Paul Orndorff has?
He's got the pile driver.
He doesn't know that. Boss, what?
It's the pile driver.
They call it the powder. How's he going to pile drive 468 pounds of King Kong Bundy? Can you picture that happening? Can you see that happening? And yet you take the avalanche, the greatest move in professional wrestling, 3,000 pounds per square inch when I hit.
Obviously, that was in King Kong Bundy's later years when he was sort of speaking for himself. There were a lot of years when he used a mouthpiece, which would be, at different times, it would be Jimmy Hart. He made his first match in the WWF actually in March 16th of 1985, where he was managed by Jimmy Hart. Jimmy Hart spoke for him. He then went on to have different people like Bobby Heenan speak for him, and he was part of the Heenan family. King Kong Bundy actually wrestled from March 7th, 1981 until July 26th of 2007.
Wow.
So that's a really, really long career. He just recently passed away, actually, March 4th of 2019. He passed away in New Jersey as a result of complications from diabetes. But as you heard in that clip, he was very proud of his size. He was probably second only to Andre in terms of being a size-based villain for people like Hulk Hogan, which he was in that steel cage match for the WWF Championship in WrestleMania 2. That was a WrestleMania that took place in Atlantic City. Unfortunately, King Kong Bundy, after that match, did not have a lot of success as a main eventer. At WrestleMania 3, he was involved in a 6-man tag team match where his partners were midgets. At King of the Ring 1987, he lost in the finals to Randy Macho Man Savage, and he ended his WWF career in late 1987 while he was sort of engaged in a feud with Bam Bam Bigelow. Remember Bam Bam Bigelow?
Oh,
Ryan?
yeah. Yes. He wore the flame leotards.
He had the flame leotards. He shaved things into his head. He wasn't completely bald, but the hair that he did have, he used to do sort of interesting things with his hairstyle. King Kong Bundy did not ever win any championships while he was in the World Wrestling Federation. He won the World Class Championship Wrestling American Heavyweight Championship twice in 1982, but that is not considered a very significant title in the grand scheme of things. Do you remember when King Kong Bundy was an actor in the late 80s, right?
Yeah. 2 episodes of Married with Children, yeah.
Yeah. I saw those because I was pretty into Married with Children.
Yes.
And when it was streaming that I like rewatched them. And I rewatched them and I go, wow, King Kong Bundy was in this one.
I was in love with Christina Applegate. Oh my goodness. Because you have to keep in mind when it started, the show started, I think in 87. I was 12 years old.
Okay, so you were right around the time for that raunchy comedy. What's Al Bundy's name? Is it Ed O'Neill?
Yeah, Ed O'Neill, the actor. And he's great in Modern Family as well, so.
Oh, he's fantastic. He's still doing stuff. He's the King Kong Bundy of acting, I think.
Yeah. Well, he did 11 seasons of Married with Children and 11 seasons of Modern Family. Go figure.
He's made his money in Hollywood. If only King Kong Bundy could have gotten that longevity.
Right.
Did you ever see the movie that King Kong Bundy was in? It was a Richard Pryor movie called Moving in 1988. Did you ever see that one?
No, I did not. I missed that one.
It was something of a small part, apparently. In that era when wrestlers were getting movie parts and King Kong Bundy was Hulk Hogan's foe at a WrestleMania. So if Hulk Hogan was getting movie parts, then why not King Kong Bundy? King Kong Bundy had his last match in Somerset, Kentucky against Hacksaw Jim Duggan in 2007.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the mentally handicapped Duggan. Ho!
Oh!
Yeah.
So King Kong Bundy was simultaneously used to go against Hogan many times, but he also did have a lot of famous clashes with the other big, huge guys of the era.
People have written biographies on these guys. There's a lot to say about every one of these, for sure. For me, I only kind of have memories. I haven't done a lot of research, so your stats stuff is really interesting. I just I don't have it, so I can only speak to the memory and the feeling of the wrestler.
I'm here to help you. You remember that bloody cage match? I'm here to tell you about his time in the Von Erichs territory.
Oh boy! All right, the next we have is Rowdy Roddy Piper, fellow Canadian, by the way.
That's right. Yeah, he's the only one on our list that's a fellow Canadian for you. I mean, I'm a Floridian, so eventually we'll get to the point where we talk.
Yeah, we know which guy's from Florida.
Way the Floridians seem to be a little bit higher on our list than Rowdy Roddy Piper.
Well, and I love Piper. I mean, he was kind of like the first not bad guy, but kind of bad guy. He was just such an antagonist.
Yes. Yeah, he was a prick.
Yeah, but he was so fun.
He was a great talker. And he could carry the good guys, which was sort of the first sign of being a great heel, was that you could carry the good guys who weren't that great at talkers. They were better at flexing their muscles. Roddy Piper was better at getting them into some pretty ridiculous situations where they would eventually kick his butt.
Yeah, he always get himself in trouble. Basically, his mouth got him in trouble. But he was a pretty tough guy, too, and you kind of got the feeling that in real life he was probably a pretty tough guy, too.
Did you know that he claims he did a tour of duty with the Canadian Army?
I probably have heard that, but I can't speak to it.
Yeah, he was born in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan in 1954.
Wow.
He had his wrestling match when he was 14 years old in Churchill, Manitoba. And after that was a match that involved midgets as well, by the way. That match, he claims that he did a tour of duty with the Canadian Army.
Oh, wow.
It's just one of the many things that add to the mystery that is Roddy Piper, because he sort of did it all. He was a lot of places. He did a lot of things. Roddy Piper is a very well-rounded wrestler in all the ways.
And he, of course, had a little bit bigger acting career than King Kong Bundy.
Well, you remember the movies that he was in, right? Did you see They Live?
Yeah, where he sees aliens with these glasses.
That's right. Somehow, some way, that movie had a budget of $3 million. It made $13 million. It was declared a hit.
And not only that, it's over the years, it's become its own cult classic.
That's right. It's become a big cult classic. I don't assume that you saw either of the other things he did as an actor in the 80s. Did you see the home video called Body Slam?
No, I missed Body Slam.
He did a straight-to-home video movie called Body Slam. That was in 1986. He was also in a movie that was a post-apocalyptic comedy in 1988. It was called Return to Frogtown.
I never saw when he was originally there, so I guess he went back.
I'm sorry, he went back where?
To Frogtown.
You ever saw the original Frogtown?
No, it was so he was there before, but I guess this story dealt with going back.
This story was all about like keeping you wanting more. So when they said return to Frogtown, they immediately wanted you to go and see if you could find the original Frogtown.
Well, I've got it here. It says Hell. It's called Hell Comes to Frogtown.
Hell Comes to Frogtown?
Yeah.
I don't have that movie in my research. Tell me about Hell Comes to Frogtown.
Maybe it was known by two different titles. It's very with these. Sorry, Hell Comes. So he did return. That was the original film. Hell Comes to Frogtown was part 1. Part 2 was Return to Frogtown.
When did Hell Come to Frogtown come out?
Well, Hell Frog.
Nothing's better than this conversation.
Hell has come to Frogtown in 1988, but he returned to Frogtown in 1993, 5 years later.
Oh, okay. Well, there it was. He spent a lot of time dealing with Frogtown. Maybe that's why he wasn't winning WWF champion.
Well, you know why it's called Hell Comes to Frogtown? His name is Sam Hell.
Yeah, that's the character that he plays. It was a pun that lasted all of 30 seconds.
Yeah, wasn't Sam Hell?
Wasn't Sam Hell. That's right.
Other characters' names are Count Sodom, played by William Smith, Looney Tunes.
Isn't it fantastic that Roddy Piper was in a movie with a guy named Will Smith, and it wasn't that Will Smith?
Yeah, that's pretty good, actually. I didn't catch that. He, unfortunately, has passed away as well.
He did. He passed away in July 31st of 2015 from a heart attack. His last match was 4 years prior to that, August 12th of 2011, where he teamed with a bunch of old-timers. He had a match for what you may not know, but it's called the Juggalo Championship Wrestling Promotion. Have you heard of it?
I have, yes.
Okay. All right. He had a match where he teamed with Bob Orton. That's Randy Orton's father. Teamed with Bob Orton to fight Mick Foley and Terry Funk. That was in 2011.
Wow.
That was about 2 months after he fought The Miz for the WWF Championship at a match on June 13th, 2011 in Nassau Coliseum.
Man, wrestling at 57, eh?
Wrestling for the title at 57. It's something that he did.
Wow.
Did you know that he lost half of his hearing in a match with Greg Valentine in 1983?
Okay.
He was in a dog collar match against Greg Valentine where he lost half the hearing in his ear because Greg Valentine smashed the dog collar against his head too hard. Roddy Piper. Obviously, he was a very big part of the Andre the Giant heel turn. He feuded with Hulk Hogan in the mid-1980s. He was a big part of WrestleMania 1. He was actually named the match of the year by Pro Wrestling Illustrated in 1985 for his match against Hulk Hogan and Mr. T at WrestleMania 1.
Nice.
So this guy has a match of the year under his belt, so give him credit for that.
He had a real-life spat with Vince Russo. He blamed Vince Russo on Owen Hart's death.
Well, Roddy Piper didn't get along with everyone, as you can imagine. Didn't get along with everyone. You have a clip of Roddy Piper, though, don't you?
What I'm doing out of the kindness of my heart, I have a gentleman here named Frank Williams. Frank Williams, first of all, I don't know where you come from.
I'm from Columbus, Ohio.
From Columbus, Ohio. I've wrestled in Columbus, Ohio. I've never lost a match in Columbus, Ohio. Have you ever lost a match?
Yeah.
You have. See, it seems odd to me when you're talking about fighting careers and a career like myself. I went on the premise of never having to lose a match. I've never lost a match in my whole career. I've had different things happen to me, but I have never actually lost a match because I figured once you were defeated one time, that it would take that oomph away from you that you needed. Yourself, you're just the opposite. I have never seen you win a match in my whole career of watching you, and I've seen you've been around. You've fought some tremendous fighters. I've seen what you've done, but you lack the guts. You lack the authority to go in there. You lack the guts, and when you're against the ropes, what you do is instead of going after a man, you just back off from him, maybe a little cowardism, maybe what you do, maybe you should be making pizzas.
I'm not a coward of nobody. I'm not afraid of nobody, otherwise I won't be down.
Wait a second. Just relax. This is verbal. This is not physical. Pizzas or something like that, maybe.
I said, I'm not afraid of nobody. I'm always inside ring, no matter what. And I don't run from nobody.
You got no room for nobody. That's a wonderful thing. You got no room for nobody, but you're a lousy wrestler. It's as simple as that.
I might be a lousy wrestler, but I'm still in there, and I'm not afraid of nobody.
Piper hammering away. Oh, no. Piper all over Frank Williams. What? Unbelievable. It's simple as this. Oh,
Oh, no. Oh, that's incredible. Oh.
They think they got the answers. I changed the questions.
As a lot of people know, this is one of the more iconic Roddy Piper catchphrases. Being the host of Piper's Pit, he was a different kind of talker. He was a different kind of promo. He always interviewed people, and he always turned it into a fight. And that was sort of the first kind of guy to do that. He has been mimicked by wrestlers throughout the ages that have these sort of interview segments. I'm partial to the one that we listened to, not just because it's the first one where he used the phrase, "As soon as you think you know the answers, I change the questions." That's what he said. But he was also chatting with a guy from my hometown from Columbus, Ohio. So I appreciate that. And he kicked that guy's butt, but he deserved it.
Yeah, nice. All right, Governor Ventura.
Governor Ventura, is he number 8 on our list?
10, 9, yes, number 8. Quite the life, eh? Quite the life. Actor, governor, wrestler.
To try and talk about Jesse Ventura and just talk about his 80s wrestling career is kind of wild, right? Because once he got into the 90s, he got very politically oriented. He obviously had some success in that realm. These days, I don't know your opinions about Jesse Ventura, but I take him largely as a conspiracy theorist.
That's what he's at now. That's where he's at right now, yep.
That's where he is right now. You've done some podcasts on conspiracy theories. Do you take any of your source material from Jesse Ventura?
I don't think we've taken any of our source material from him, but I think he buys into some of the topics we brought up.
Are you familiar with anything in specific?
Well, a lot of it, of course, is the... let's see here. I know he's big on, 9/11, probably.
I can't even imagine what Jesse Ventura has to say about 9/11. Is he the kind of guy that says that their fuel wouldn't have burned hot enough?
Well, he had his own TV show called Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura. It says here that Ventura will hunt down answers, plunging viewers into a world of secret meetings, midnight surveillance, shifty characters, and dark forces. It aired on True TV.
And you subscribed and watched every episode?
No, I never seen one. He had 3 seasons of that, and that, of course, that got shut down by the Illuminati. So
the Illuminati.
He's also written books on conspiracies, and whatever the case may be, he's made money from believing in conspiracies. He's made money from it, so bless his heart. And he's still alive, so he's the first one on our list right now who's still breathing air.
That's right. We don't have to tell any stories about when or how Jesse died. He was born in Minneapolis in 1951, July 15th. He had his first match with Central States Wrestling April 24th of 1975. He beat some jobbers in that match. He actually had his very final match in 1990 on March 25th, where he teamed with the very last guy we talked about. He had a tag team match with Roddy Piper against the Orient Express. That was a WWF match in Los Angeles. Jesse Ventura is one of the guys that, from a title perspective, is a little less accomplished than the others on our list.
Right.
On some regional tag titles in some of those NWA territories with people like Adrian Adonis and Buddy Rose, but he never rose to have any titles in the WWF.
No.
He was voted by the Wrestling Observer the best color commentator in 87, 88, and 89.
Well, that's how I knew him. That's really kind of how I knew. He was when his glory days in those promotional wrestling circuits, I only kind of knew him as a kid as the guy that always kind of cheered for the heels when he was commentating. He'd always smack talk Hogan and other things. I very rarely saw him wrestle as a kid.
He was very eloquent. He was very verbose. We're going to listen to a promo later where he's just saying all these words that you're not going to hear in any of these other promos that we're going to hear. Because this guy was quite intelligent with the way that he structured his promos and the way that he approached things.
Will be going against my guest at this time. And on the line, the Intercontinental Championship of the World for you, Jesse the Body Ventura. Welcome back to the Bay Area.
Well, you know what? This is going to be truly indeed a sad day for old Chico from Tijuana.
Well, he's from Tacula, Mexico.
Well, yeah, that's a suburb of Tijuana. Who cares, you know? You ever been down there? You ever faced Chico's revenge when he'd sell you one of them tacos? Wow, 24 hours later, you pay for it, Mean Gene.
Along with a little Mexican tap water.
Yeah.
Yes, I get it.
Let me say this to you, Chico. It's going to be a double loss to you. Number one, after I whip you for your Intercontinental title, you're facing a lawsuit from me, my man, for coming out on national television and lying. lying to all the people in the Bay Area, telling them Jesse the Body Ventura hit you with brass knuckles, Chico Santana, the last time in that tag match when me and the Macho Man slapped you and that Pedro Morales from here all the way to San Jose. We even, when they were done, they even asked us. They didn't know the way to San Jose.
I got that the first time, Jesse.
Because we knocked them out. Chico, all you got was a fist sandwich. And what you gonna say this time? What will the excuse be this time, Chico, when Jesse the Body lays the big fist right in the chops and you're down for the 10 count? You not only lose the Intercontinental title, but you lose all that money when I take you to court, Chico, for lying, for slander, for doing what you did to me, saying I hit you with a foreign object. How atrocious will you be?
All right, I thank you,
That
Jesse
insults
Ventura.
my integrity.
Tomorrow night,
And you know I got
Coliseum
integrity.
Arena.
This was sort of an example of Jesse Ventura at his greatest, not politically correct, not anything that you'd hear anybody say in 2020, but he was, he said it in such a way that you understood that he was experienced and that he was intelligent. Mean Gene was great about giving all these guys a sort of outlet to be their characters. Jesse's character was a little bit smarter than the average bear. He had some pretty entertaining feuds with Hulk Hogan. He got to challenge Hulk Hogan for the World Wrestling Federation title a couple of times while he was in the WWF. He never won it. He eventually sort of retired around mid-1985. He really did not have much of a late 1980s to speak of. Part of this was because he got into an acting career, like some of these other guys. I assume that you've seen the first Predator movie.
Of course, many times. I probably know him best from the Predator movie than anything else at this point in my life.
I was going to say, what did you think about his performance in the first Predator movie?
Oh, it was incredible. He doesn't have time to bleed, that's for sure.
He was pretty good. At the very least, he was going to have a catchphrase in that movie, and he was going to be memorable to people from that movie, despite the fact that he died, right? He died.
Yeah, oh yeah. The only one that didn't die was Female and Arnold.
That's right. So Jesse Ventura, he was part of the WWF throughout the 80s. That's where he sort of made his name. He famously sued the WWF in the very early 90s about royalties, and he sort of got himself blackballed because he was one of the first people that was really interested in getting his royalties from his commentary work. And as they would continue to sell these videos, he was just very smart and very shrewd about his business tactics and pissed Vince McMahon off in all the right ways, from my understanding.
Good. All right, so he's alive, but the next one that we're about to talk about is not. Regarding this individual, Dusty Rhodes, he was the first one. He's the first one on our list where I only knew about him through other wrestling magazines. I just knew at the time when I was a kid that he was a big-time wrestler in the other circuits, but I was not familiar with him until the internet era when I could go back and look at matches and interviews and also biographies and podcasts to get to know his influence and personality.
Fair enough, but you certainly probably grew up at a certain point knowing his son, WWF, and then eventually you would know his other son, who is in the WWF and has now created All Elite Wrestling, right?
Right. That's right.
Right. He's left a certain legacy different than some other people. He's got these surrogates kind of continuing his name in a lot of different ways. Did you ever see Dusty when he did join the WWF in the late 80s?
No, I stopped watching at that point. I would say no. I don't think I ever remember watching him wrestle.
That's probably the best thing that you could have said. Once he joined the WWF in 1989, he was given an incredibly embarrassing gimmick that involved him wearing polka dots.
I heard about that. Yes.
Part of that was, whether you believe this or not, but the dirt sheets would report the polka dots and the very goofy gimmick and the losing streak that he went on when he joined the WWF in the very late 80s was due to his success in promotions that were competitors with the WWF.
Right.
So he sort of got himself into that situation by being a little too good at what he did. Dusty Rhodes was originally a part of the NWA Alliance. He was originally part of those territories that made up the NWA in the late 70s. He won his very first world title in 1981 over Harley Race. He beat Harley Race for the NWA World Championship on June 21st of 1981. That was a title reign that only lasted about 3 months, and it was sort of used to set up Ric Flair for Ric Flair's first title run that would happen in September of 1981. So both Dusty and Rick both got their first big breaks right within 3 or 4 months of each other in terms of winning their first world titles. Dusty won another world title 5 years later. He won that over Ric Flair at the Great American Bash in 1986 on July 26th. That was about a 2-week title reign where he got to hold the belt for 2 weeks, and he eventually lost it back to Ric Flair. The Wrestling Observer gave Dusty Rhodes the Best Booker Award in 1986. The year that Dusty agreed to win, I guess he agreed to win the title and then give it back in 2 weeks. Okay?
Right.
Whether that was a decision that he wanted to win it, but he was willing to give it back, or maybe it was a decision where he really didn't deserve to win it at all, but he just wanted it. So he said, give it to me for 2 weeks.
Okay.
When you're the booker and you're the wrestler, it's an interesting position to be in. And Dusty was in that position in the 1980s. He won the match of the year in 1986 for his steel cage match with Ric Flair. He certainly did not win the WWF Championship at any point. So what he has to his credit is that 2-time reign with the NWA Championship that lasted less than 4 months total.
Of our list so far, he's probably got the biggest career success.
He had a lot of career success, and he got to the World Championship. What he also did was as a booker, he was innovative in the way that wrestling was presented and the way that it was turned into a TV-first product in the 1980s. The NWA had regular TV tapings. That was a new thing. It was even before Monday Night Raw was regular. To have a regular TV show and to want to do things for a weekly process, that was new, and Dusty was doing the booking. You ever heard of a Dusty finish?
Maybe, but I couldn't tell you what it is.
A Dusty finish is something that's become synonymous with his method of booking. His method of booking was to let a heel champion, someone like a Ric Flair or someone like a Harley Race or even a Dusty Rhodes at times, to have the championship, fight against a good guy, a face, have the face win. The whole crowd would go wild thinking that the face had won the title. And then the decision would be overturned by a referee or an authority figure at some point. So you would have a lot of fake championship wins or faux celebrations, at least. Within 2 or 3 minutes after the crowd had kind of died down, then you'd find out that they didn't really happen.
I like it.
Dusty's enduring legacy as a booker. That continued throughout the 90s. He sort of put his mark on the industry in that way as well.
Here is the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. And Dusty, your fans welcome you back, man.
First of all, I would like to thank the many, many fans throughout this country that wrote cards and letters to Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, while I was down. Secondly, I want to thank Jim Crockett Promotions for waiting and taking the time, because I know how important it was. Starcade 85, it is to the wrestling fans, it is to Jim Crockett Promotions. And Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, with that weight, got what I wanted. Ric Flair, the world's heavyweight champion. I don't have to say a lot more about the way I feel about Ric Flair. No respect, no honor. There is no honor among thieves in the first place. He put hard times on Dusty Rhodes and his family. You don't know what hard times are, Daddy. Hard times are when the textile workers around this country are out of work and got 4 or 5 kids and can't pay their wages, can't buy their food. Hard times are when the auto workers are out of work and they tell them go home. And hard times are when a man has worked at a job 30 years. 30 years, they give him a watch, kick him in the butt, and say, hey, a computer took your place, Daddy. That's hard time. That's hard time.
That Hard Times interview is an emotional piece for me. It's his face persona. It's his common man, his everyman, his working man persona. That was kind of what he did best. The way that he spoke, the lisp, it's just so iconic. I've heard a lot of people reflect on that as maybe one of the best professional wrestling interviews ever. And it's sort of hard to put your finger on that. It really depends on what you like in an interview. But Dusty Rhodes was emotional, and he told a good story there. And it wasn't just about this guy hit me a chair in the ring. It was about his reason for existing as a wrestler. And I feel like that gets lost sometimes. We don't hear a lot of those types of interviews these days.
All right, beautiful. Coming to number 6, I think this is fair. The Ultimate Warrior, another very dead wrestler on our list. So far, we're 1 for 5 are alive.
1 for 5. This would be 1 for 5 as far as who is still with us.
Okay, so Ultimate Warrior, he would draw strength from the warriors above. He would enter the ring full. He would exude half his energy running to the ring. I think that's why his matches were so short, because he was so out of breath. He would charge into the ring, and I remember he would slam the ropes there and call down the energy of the warriors, and had very little wrestling skill. He pretty much was just he got the crowd going. He was in and out in a flash, and was angry, and makeup would never last the whole match either. It would fall off throughout the match. It always bothered me that the makeup was cheaply done where it wouldn't last the match.
It bothered me that he would do that, but then do you remember when he would go to something that looked like a decal or something that looked like it was glued on? That was worse.
For our Canadian listeners, what he said there was a decal.
I don't understand the question, and I won't respond to it.
No, decal. In the States, you guys call them decals. In Canada, we call them decals.
Is there a reason for that?
I don't know. Is there a reason why you call them decals? It's weird. I served in the U.S. military for 4 years on a base there, working with the U.S. Navy. Someone told me to go get a decal for my car. I was like, what? And I had to ask what that was. And they looked at me like, you don't know what a sticker is?
So we'll just use the term sticker.
A decal is what you put on your car window or for a parking pass, and that's what they were telling me to get. So I'm only saying that because we have a lot of Canadian listeners. So a decal is a sticker or a decal. I'm not even joking.
I'm thrilled to know that you have a lot of listeners no matter where they are.
Oh, yeah, I wish. Maybe one day. Maybe this wrestling episode might give us a couple. Wrestling, as you said, is pretty big on the podcast circuits, but maybe people are tired of hearing about it, so who knows?
I think that'll ever happen. I think there's a constant need for more wrestling content on the internet.
Well, we'll see if this one pops, as they say. I do have an Ultimate Warrior story.
Tell me about your Ultimate Warrior story.
I had stopped watching wrestling at this point. This was 1990. I was at the Atlanta, Georgia airport flying from Florida to Seattle. I was with my friend who took me to Disneyland. And it's a long story how I ended up with my friend's family at Disney World, and we were returning flight back, so we just did the Florida to Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm in the airport, and I'm 15 years old. I'd stopped watching wrestling at this point. This is 1990. I stopped watching wrestling probably 86, 87. I'm 12 years old. You don't watch wrestling anymore when you're 12 years old as a kid back then.
Watching auteur films.
Yeah, exactly. I was rolling into films. I think I knew wrestling was quote-unquote fake, so the appeal of the outcome of the matches was really lost on me.
Right.
Anyway, so I was not watching wrestling anymore. I saw this guy sitting a few seats away. I could see that he was big. I could tell this guy was big. And my brain went to that this was a Seattle Seahawks football player, because I noticed a couple of people had gone up to him and he shooed them away. I'm like, okay, well, he wants to be left alone because he's a football player and he's going to Seattle Seahawks, going back home from a football game. Why he's by himself, I didn't think anything of that. I just thought maybe he's just, he's a football player. And then I looked at him closely again. I'm like, oh my goodness, his hair was pulled back in a ponytail. Boy, I've never seen a football player with that long hair before. And then I'm looking closer. I'm like, oh my gosh, I said, you're the Ultimate Warrior. And he looked at me and said, shut up, kid.
So that's your story.
True story.
True story. That is incredibly in line with all of the research that I've done about Jim Hellwig and his response to kids.
Yeah. So I quote unquote, met the Ultimate Warrior. For a microsecond, I was in his in his life as I caused him irritation, that I found out who he was under no makeup, the long hair and a ponytail, and he was wearing casual attire. Because it didn't dawn on me. I'd only seen the Warrior dressed up in makeup and bands around his biceps cutting off the circulation. I'd never seen him just as a person.
That's a great story. I don't think I have. No, I know I don't have any stories like that from any of the folks on our list. You are blessed to have at least the benefit of being casually dismissed by a former WWF world champion.
It makes sense. It was definitely He was probably the only way that would have ever happened. I can't imagine he would have called me over and said, "Hey, do you want to talk wrestling there, kid?" Yeah.
That's what I'm here for. I'm here to talk wrestling with kids. His character eventually did immigrate or migrate into a character that had the little warriors, just like the Hulk had the little Hulksters, and tried to be that guy. But he was only that guy for a couple of months, truth be told. Coming into the WWE, he was called the Dingo Warrior. He was not everyone's favorite locker room person. As a superstar in the WWF, he wasn't even really part of that for very long. He came into the WWF in June 17th of 1987, where he fought the Brooklyn Brawler. A lot of people's first matches were against the Brooklyn Brawler. God bless him. That was a match in Wichita Falls. He then had kind of like a feud with King Harley Race, and then he got into it with the Honky Tonk Man, and he won his Intercontinental Championship from the Honky Tonk Man. Did you like the Honky Tonk Man, Ryan?
I'll say this with the Honky Tonk Man. He was my first introduction to wrestling podcasting.
You listened to, wait a second, the Honky Tonk Man had a podcast?
Yeah. Yeah, and he really spilled some beans on people.
I can only imagine that that's the absolute worst thing to listen to. Honky Tonk Man's still with us?
Is he still alive? I think he is.
I really don't know.
Yeah, he's still alive. He's 67. He currently lives in Gilbert, Arizona.
Can you even imagine how on earth is a man named the Honky Tonk Man living in Arizona? He needs to be in the Tennessee, Kentucky area, no further. I just don't understand how that works.
Yeah. I forget how I found that podcast. This was like years ago. And when I first started listening to podcasts 7-8 years ago, and he had a podcast, a very crummy podcast where he was just honky tonking on everybody.
So it certainly wasn't any of the well-refined, historical, pointed Conrad Thompson podcast that we're talking about these days.
No.
This was just honky tonk venting.
He had Psychic too.
Oh, really? The roadie?
I can't remember. Yeah. It was called, that's right. It's an online radio show right now. It's called the Honky Tonk Shake, Rattle, and Roll.
Yeah, that should be illegal.
Oh, it's on Apple Podcasts.
Here we are talking about a competitor, I suppose.
Well, I don't know how many episodes he's got recently here. It's only got a few episodes on Apple, but still there. Honky Tonk Man. The last episode was Honky Tonk Man Shake, Rattle, and Roll returns to the airwaves April 2018, but then he quickly disappeared after that again.
Inevitably, he was going to say something really stupid that would just get him either a violation of a non-disclosure or a non-disparagement agreement that he's, clearly a part of. So he needs to just probably keep his mouth shut, is my opinion.
In other action, for the Intercontinental Championship, King Haku to meet the Ultimate Warrior.
The question that arises in my mind is why would a king want for anything else? If a king has everything that he is supposed to have, then why would he want? Why would he want to challenge the power of the Ultimate Warrior? Well, it must be the thing that's hanging around my waist. You don't have to deal with me, King. You have to deal with all the warriors that were riding on all these huge, immense body parts of mine. If you think that your title and your desire and you have what it takes to come and challenge the Ultimate Warrior, then bring it with all the fire and fury that you can muster, because there's only one place to go when you challenge the Warrior. Down!
The Ultimate Warrior to face King Haku, Friday night, January 13th at the Nassau Coliseum.
It's a little bit less crazy than a lot of the stuff he got into in the early 90s, but a lot of people remember that. It was cocaine-addled and the rest.
Yeah. We know that his energy that he got was not from the Ultimate Warrior Spirits in the Sky. It was just what was swimming in his nose.
That's right.
May you rest in peace, Mr. Warrior. Now this guy's alive. Ric Flair.
Oh, Ric Flair. Yep, we'll move on to Ric Flair. Ric Flair is alive. He currently lives in Lawrenceville, Georgia, which is not too far from some of my family lives. So I'm just in that area from time to time. He made his debut in December of 1972, and he wrestled until 2011, where he has last match against Sting. So he had a almost 40-year wrestling career. This was after his very well-publicized retirement match with Shawn Michaels and several quasi-retirement matches with people in the 90s. But in the 80s, Ric Flair was known as the guy that had the belt. He had the NWA world title in the 80s. He never came to the WWF in the 80s. Of course, we know the WWF was really only a thing for about 83 on, but Ric Flair wrestled in the NWA territories, and he held their title on 7 occasions. He won his first title from Dusty Rhodes in September of 1981. He held it for 631 days, and then he lost it to Harley Race in St. Louis. He won it back about half a year later, 167 days later in Greensboro. Then he lost it again to Harley Race about 118 days later in Wellington, New Zealand. That's right. This guy was traveling the world defending this title. It's a little bit different situation than you had with some of the WWF guys who fought mostly in Canada or the Northeast. He won that title back from Harley Race 2 days later in Singapore. He held that title for 44 days, and then he lost it to Kerry Von Erich in Texas in May of 1984. But then he got it back 2 weeks later in Yokosuka, Japan. So this is a guy that's won world titles in many different places throughout the world. It's pretty cool, I thought. He held that title for 793 days before he lost it again to Dusty Rhodes in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1986. Dusty only held the belt for 2 weeks, and then he gave it back to Rick in St. Louis. And then Rick held it for another 412 days before he lost it to Ronnie Garvin. He did that on September 25th, 1987. He won that belt back from Ronnie Garvin in less than 2 months in Chicago. He held it for another 452 days before he lost it to Ricky Steamboat in February of 1989. He won it back 76 days later for his 7th time during that decade on May 7th, 1989 in Nashville, Tennessee. And he held it again for 426 days.
Wow.
That time, he formed the Four Horsemen, which is his famous stable with J.J. Dillon, Arn Anderson, Ole Anderson. These are the guys that would sort of build their legacy alongside Rick, and Rick couldn't have done it without him. He was the Wrestler of the Year for Pro Wrestling Illustrated 1981, 1984, 85, 86, and 89. He was the Wrestler of the Year for the Wrestling Observer for 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, and 89. He had the Match of the Year between those two publications a combined 10 times. This is the Wrestler of the 80s. If you look at it, he fought all the guys that people know about. The only mark on his legacy is that he didn't work for the WWF.
Yeah. As a kid, that was the thing, I was like, he's no Hogan.
He's no Hogan. And they really played on that in 1991, 92, when Flair finally came to the WWF. Did you watch any of those? You were a little older.
No, I stopped watching at that point, but I've gone back. And then during the Attitude Era, the Monday Night Wars, I saw some of that action.
They spent the whole 80s setting up the entire wrestling industry for Hogan versus Flair, right? When they eventually got both of those guys in the same promotion at the same time, they screwed it up.
Of course.
Of course. So that's where we are with Ric Flair. God bless Ric Flair. He's got a legacy just like Dusty Rhodes. His daughter is a 12-time women's champion in the WWF right now. She's chasing his legacy. If she does anything right, she's going to beat his 16 world titles pretty quickly. And,
Charlotte Flair.
Yeah, she does. Ashley goes by Charlotte. Yep.
She's nothing to sneeze at.
Nothing to sneeze at. She's a tall drink of water.
Yep. I would let her do a full body press on me if she needed.
She could practice her moonsaults on you.
Yeah. What's that move when they tape the thighs and squeeze your head?
It's called the thank you. Can I have another?
Yeah. I'd be dead in 2 seconds, but die happy.
So Ric Flair, for you, if you didn't experience him in the WWF,
no.
you know about him culturally.
Yes, of course. I mean, through magazines, of course, again, through my study of wrestling in the internet days, yes, I'm very familiar with him and the time that I saw him in the NWO and what have you. Yeah.
Oh, gosh, the NWO.
Yeah.
Ric Flair in the NWO is a lot of stuff that a lot of people would like to forget. His work in the 80s is absolutely remarkable. He really carried the ball for them for an entire decade, and then being the NWA, which eventually became WCW, which eventually became WWF, and that's a mouthful.
The heavyweight champion of the world, Nature Boy Ric Flair.
Ladies, woo, it is so hard to be humble when you're looking like Ric Flair. And to cap last night's events, As I walked out of New York City today, every woman within 100 yards was hollering, "Here comes the boss." And Bruce Springsteen was nowhere to be seen. Bruce Springsteen, if you can follow my act in New York, then you will be the boss. Now, let's talk about what's happening. Baltimore, Philadelphia, Magnum PA. You know, girls, I know you like it when I slide out of these clothes. You see, the difference between me and a lot of these so-called big-time stars is that I'm custom made with the clothes. I got the big Rolex watches. I got everything that's going on. I'm the best-looking man alive. I'm not Dusty Rhodes sitting in the control room with a David Allen Coe truck driving hat on. I'm not wearing blue jeans. I don't have on a funky t-shirt. I'm alligators and Rolex watches from head to toe. I'm the man. And you see that I can roll up this shirt and I can drive us. Take a look at that, huh? Arnold Schwarzenegger, be glad you're making movies. You see, I'm what it's all about, girls. I'm what's happening. I'm the world champion. Now you look at Magnum TA. He looks like Jim Cornette with his clothes off. Magnum, how can you possibly expect to be the world champion with a body like that? Them teeny-weeny arms and those skinny-weeny legs and that so turkey-looking neck. And you want to jump on this? Don't wrap me up. Dusty Rhodes, Magnum TA, Nikita, teeny-weeny Buddy Landau. Woo. It makes no difference. When you're Ric Flair and you're the world champion, Tony, you just got to call it as you see it. Woo!
It's pretty good, right?
Iron Sheik, now this is our next one. He's number 4 on the list. He is definitely the first bad guy that I can remember.
Well, he was definitely a WWF bad guy, and he was definitely one of the traditional foreign bad guys. As a trope of a wrestling heel, I don't know if foreign bad guy, I don't know if anything beats foreign bad guy, right?
Enemy of the state.
He was enemy of the state. Especially in the 80s, he gave his interviews, and sometimes he did not speak English, and that was a problem. And then in the 1980s, right? How dare you not speak English?
Well, it's a problem now in some parts of the States, quite frankly.
We're going to listen to a promo in a second that has him being reminded that he does know how to speak English, and that's kind of funny to me because these kinds of guys, that part of their gimmick was be confusing because that's frustrating and that will piss people off, right?
Currently resides the fateful state of Georgia, Fayetteville, Georgia.
Yeah, he currently resides in Georgia, but he was originally born in 1942 in Tehran, Iran.
Is he truly a sheik, or he's just from Iran?
He's absolutely not a sheik. He's just a dude from Iran. You know? He wrestled all over like some of these guys. He eventually came to the WWF from 1983 to 1987. Very, very, very quickly after joining the WWF in December 26th of 1983, he beat Bob Backlund for the WWF Heavyweight Championship. This was a shock, not just because Iron Sheik was only in the WWF for a few months, but also because Bob Backlund had the WWF Championship for 2,135 days. He had held that title since February 20th of 1978. Took it from the good guy, Bob Backlund, who I don't know if you follow the American politics, but after he left wrestling, he became a senator.
Oh, right, yeah.
No good reason other than people didn't knew his name, right? You know, he held that title for 5 years and he lost it to Iron Sheik. He only held it for a very short time. He held it for 28 days. And then who did he lose it to? He lost it to Hulk Hogan.
Right. That's right.
Do you have any vivid memories of when Hulk Hogan won the championship?
I probably saw it as a kid. I don't remember. I've gone back and have seen it since. I've watched so many Hulk Hogan anthologies and matches. I've seen them win it from the Sheik and how crazy the crowd popped. It's an incredible thing to watch on YouTube. You want to watch that.
It's a fantastic match on YouTube. One of the things that a lot of people don't know is that in the build up to that match that was set for January 23rd of 1984, that match was supposed to be Sheik versus Backlund. It was supposed to be a rematch of the championship match. very quickly, briefly before the match, Backlund back out, and it was Hogan. And so Sheik didn't have any time to prepare. It was that whole sort of thing. He thought he was fighting someone else. So Hogan got the jump on him, and Hogan held that title for, as we will hear, Hogan held that title for years after he beat the Sheik. The Sheik went on to stay with the WWF. He had a tag team with Nikolai Volkov. They were a bunch of bad guys. They had the tag team championship for about 78 days after WrestleMania 1. And then after that, the Sheik got arrested for driving around New Jersey with Hacksaw Jim Duggan. One of them was high on coke. One of them was high on weed. And so Sheik left the WWF for a couple of years after that.
I'd like to bring in at this time, if I may, he is from Tehran, Iran. He is a former heavyweight champion of the world. He is the Iron Sheik. Iron Sheik, what do we have here? Number one, turn the book around, frontward.
This is a foreign world. You don't have to insult me. Iranian writing is the opposite English. That's the Iranian writing. I was California a couple of weeks ago,
What does this say? What does this say?
That said the Iron Sheik. Please, cameraman, zoom to that thing very good.
He's got it in there pretty
That's right. Before even I speak, I prefer to speak to that people. خدمت همه شنوندگان ایرانی عزیز که در کالیفرنیا زندگی میکنن سلام عرض میکنم و موفقیت همه شما را آرزو میکنم. خسرو وزیری قهرمان تیم ملی ایران به آمریکا آمده.
Sheik, what are you saying? Come on, you speak pretty good English. For the benefit of all of us here. Let's try a little,
Well, I just try to say to the American, everybody know Iran is one of the oldest country in the world, and long time ago, wrestling come from Iran. Persia. The old name was Persia, the new name is Iran. Now, I come to America, and I show to the all American people, everybody ask me in the street, what happened to Bob Backlund? I said, I hurt him so bad. I hurt his shoulder after that camel clutch. He have to leave the WWF territory. Now, two things bother me. Sergeant Slaughter and that idiot Hulk Hogan. Anywhere I go, they talk about my belt. As far as I know, one wrestler is have a guts and is grand champion, and that's the Iron
Thank you very much. The words of the Iron Sheik. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. I think I remember that.
That was a pretty good promo. I did enjoy Sheiky Baby giving his traditional humble you kind of approach. That was what he was good at. He was very, very strong heel, and he was very frustrating to deal with for a lot of people. A lot of people, kids hated him because he was foreign. People just hated him because he was foreign.
That's awesome. All right, speaking of foreigners.
That's right.
Andre the Giant, larger than life, turned heel on Hogan. He never really peaked again after that.
Yeah, Andre the Giant was in the WWF for quite some time prior to his match with Hogan. But that match at WrestleMania 3 is what everyone thinks of. For several reasons. One, people are under the impression that match at WrestleMania 3 was the first time and the only time that anyone ever body slammed Andre.
Right.
Not true. They just were pretty good at making that assertion and making it seem true. Andre and Hogan were actually rivals for several years prior to that. They had a match at what was called the Showdown at Shea Stadium in 1980, and that was in the WWF. It was in a baseball stadium. It was pretty cool. Andre the Giant had a lot of feuds with some other guys in the WWF, mostly the big guys. He had feuds with Killer Khan. He had feuds with Big John Studd about who was the biggest and the baddest.
Right.
But eventually, as they wanted to turn him into something significant, have him go after the championship, he had to turn on Hulk Hogan. And that was at that Piper's Pit episode that you talked about. That one where he grabbed the cross and he slapped Hogan on the chest, and somehow Hogan started bleeding, and I don't really understand how that worked.
It was an accident. It was real blood. It was an accident. It was a happy accident that added to the show. The necklace actually cut Hogan's skin.
Oh, have you heard that? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But it added a great visual to the moment of what they were doing there. He fought Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 3. The rumors are that he drank 14 bottles of wine before that match against Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
He was alcoholic of his time. Part of it was because his thyroid issue and his issue with being such a large man was painful to him. It was painful to him for most of his career. So being in that match with Hogan, and then he didn't really rise to the occasion, or he wasn't really a main event guy after that. Well, part of that was because he wasn't really able to have matches after that, ones of significant importance or ones that would be legitimate. He was always sort of hiding behind some sort of gimmick, being the fact that he couldn't walk to the ring, so they had to have carts to take him, or he would be in team matches where most of his match he was just sort of hanging on the ropes, right? But despite all of that, after his match with Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 3, he did get the WWF Championship one time. He won it one time. He won it in 1988 and February 5th at the main event. He won it from Hulk Hogan in a match that they had 50 matches prior to that, and he couldn't beat Hulk Hogan. He finally beat Hulk Hogan. Remember what he did after he won that belt?
I can't. You'll tell me. I watched the biography on HBO or wherever that was really good, but I can't remember.
He won the championship from Hulk Hogan for the very first time, his very first world championship ever, and he sold it to Ted DiBiase.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Sold it to Ted DiBiase. Ted DiBiase did not get to call himself a world champion. Instead, the president of the WWF vacated that title. And that's what led to the championship tournament at WrestleMania 4. That's what led to the next person in our list to get their first WWF championship. And that's what really ended Andre the Giant's time in the top of the
food chain.
Event.
Andre, one thing.
And I'm going to tell you one thing, Axel Duggan. You're the one who started, and you're the one who get the trouble. Because you're so stupid. You are the one who asked for it. You challenged me. You maybe put me down with that 2x4. But now it's my turn to put you down. But the way I will put you down, Dr. Duggan, I don't need a 2x4. The only thing I need is just my hand, Axel Duggan. I will get you by that neck. And I will squeeze and squeeze and squeeze, Duggan. I will squeeze until you got just a little bit there to say, I give. And you will give, Axel Duggan, because what you ask for it, you will get it, and you will get it the Giant way. Because now I'm mad, and when I'm mad, believe me.
And one other thing, when he's mad, he's dangerous. More dangerous than any human walking this earth. So, Mr. Duggan, you get your board ready. Because as far as I'm concerned, you've had it.
That's right. Andre used a mouthpiece for much of his career. Bobby the Brain Heenan was the best of all the mouthpieces. This promo was a little bit of him talking after Andre set him up.
And rest in peace, Andre, and rest in peace, Bobby the Brain Heenan, and rest in peace, Mean Gene Okerlund. Boy.
That's right, all of them.
Speaking of rest in peace, I will say this right now, my favorite wrestler of all time, Macho Man Randy Savage.
That's pretty fantastic that we both agree on that. As I was looking at this list, I was wondering, what does Ryan think? Who's his guy? I pray to God he wasn't a King Kong Bundy fan. The thought crossed my mind that maybe in the ways that we agree on different things, maybe we agree that Macho Man Randy Savage is one of the best.
I loved his style. I loved his energy. I loved his wrestling ability. He was a great heel, but it was a heel that you felt sorry for, and that's great heelmanship. He was bad, but he was misunderstood, I think. The way he spoke, he was just every vein popping. You could almost feel the painful way that he spoke. The way that he was just a jerk in real life. Elizabeth alone, I mean, my gosh. I mean, what young boy was not in love with Elizabeth?
Macho's association with Elizabeth gave him a level that was unlike any of these other characters that we've talked about. None of these other characters, I mean, Andre and Bundy, they had Bobby Heenan as their manager. Elizabeth was Macho's manager, but she was much, much more than that. From the way that he would protect her, or zealously guard her from just all the different things that he experienced, it sort of made you feel like it wasn't just Randy going through what Randy was going through. Randy was going through these things with Elizabeth. They were a team. Once the Mega Powers formed, Elizabeth was the most important part of that team. She was involved with the champion and the former world champion. But who was the focal point of that storyline? It was Elizabeth. You can't say enough. And of course, rest in peace, Elizabeth. My favorite as well. Macho was born in my hometown of Columbus, Ohio.
Oh, wow.
Macho was denoted from, or he hailed from, or he was billed from the city that I currently live in Sarasota, Florida. There are different things here in town that sort of celebrate his existence because he did, have an impact on this community. It's a sad thing that he's gone. There's so many wrestlers right now, CM Punk and Dolph Ziggler and these different guys that are wrestlers right now that look back at Macho as their inspiration for what they do. And
rightfully so. Yeah, he passed away in 2011 at the age of 58.
Yeah.
Can't believe Elizabeth died at the age of 42. I'm 2 years older than she was.
Let's just hope that you haven't engaged in the recreational activities that...
Yeah, it's drugs that took her. It's drugs.
It was drugs. And she was living with Lex Luger at the time, living an unhealthy lifestyle.
Acute toxicity. So it was a mixture of painkillers and vodka.
Yep. In terms of Macho's legacy, obviously he had the one WWF championship run. He had a very significant run where he got to take the vacant title from the tournament at WrestleMania 4. He held that title for an entire year until he lost it at WrestleMania 5. The entirety of that year was the Mega Power storyline. So the entirety of that year was him being embraced by Hulk Hogan, who was the former champion. And a lot of people thought no one else could be champion but Hulk Hogan because he had held that title for 4 years. Macho took that title, and as a heel and as a smaller character, he defended it against all sorts of people. I think he defended it like 40 some times over the course of that year. He held it for exactly 1 year, and then he lost it to Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 5, which led to Hulk Hogan holding it for another year after that. The title itself was, sort of held in chunks, but Macho got one of those very good chunks. That testament to what they thought of him and his drawing power and how he could work with the people that were in the industry at the time. And people around the world believe that Mega Power storyline is probably the best storyline that wrestling ever told. And I think you and I are here to say that it was certainly an interesting part of the WWF in the mid-'80s. It took up a lot of their airtime, and I loved it.
Yeah. Having Macho Man and Hogan together was an unstoppable force through a young child's eyes.
Yep. And they got to beat people like Andre and DiBiase, and they had some great wins as a team. It was very rare for two good guys to be a team like that. Usually two good guys would fight with each other because they both wanted the same thing. Eventually, that's what it came to. It came to that on the title front, and it came to that on the Elizabeth front, which is what made it one of the best storylines ever.
I'm talking about the former Intercontinental Champion of the world, Macho Man Randy Savage.
Nothing means nothing.
Nothing
means nothing. Man.
Nothing means nothing. What do you mean by that?
I'm talking about all the way to the top, yeah. Unjustifiably in a position that I'd rather not be in, but the cream will rise to the top. Oh, yeah. Macho Madness, yeah, has got more to offer than President Jack Tunney thinks that I got. Yeah, and I'm going to tell you something right now. Cards stacked against the Macho Man Randy Savage in WrestleMania 3. Yeah, let me say it, yeah. Let me say it out loud. And let me point to the president of the World Wrestling Federation. The Macho Man Randy Savage is not happy with your decision, yeah. I am the cream in the World Wrestling Federation.
Wait a minute,
and there is no doubt about it, yeah. You mean Gene Okerlund. You know that I'm the cream of the crop.
Oh, wait a minute, though, Randy. I've got to ask you very seriously. Do you blame Mr. Jack Tunney, the distinguished president of the World Wrestling Federation, for Ricky Steamboat being the Intercontinental Champion today?
Yeah, I do, yeah. Outside interference, yeah. In my moment of glory. Yeah, no, I'm living in a nightmare. And I am the cream. And now, not only the Intercontinental Heavyweight Championship belt must fall, but the World Heavyweight Championship belt. Because Hulk Hogan, yeah, I am the cream, yeah. The cream of the crop. And there is no one that does it better than the Macho Man Randy Savage. On balance, off balance, doesn't matter. I'm better than you are, yeah. And I'm talking to everyone in the World Wrestling Federation. And I'm even talking to President Jack Tunney, yeah. I'm on my way. And nothing is going to stop me. Nothing's going to stop me.
You know, just out of curiosity, Randy, and I certainly don't want to diminish your tremendous God-given talents, but I'm very curious. I haven't seen Elizabeth lately.
Yeah, she's on the outside of the ring. Does she interfere in matches? Yeah. Nothing, zero, yeah. Pure athlete, yeah. And I've been, maligned from the top to the bottom. And because I can't handle the Macho Man Randy Savage. Savage, the cream of the crop. Nobody does it better.
That's definitely one of my favorite promos ever. It's short, it's sweet. Macho has the cadence that we all know about him, the way that he refers to himself in the third person, and the way that he sees life, the way that he's sort of a perpetual underdog, even in his own mind, even when he's the champion or about to be the champion. So Macho definitely, if not my favorite wrestler, one of my favorite wrestlers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But there is the number one, though, and I think he rightfully is number one because of what he's done for wrestling. There's a lot of debate about this even now, but I think debate should be put to rest that Hulk Hogan belongs at the top. I don't know who else could have done what he did at the time that he did it.
No, there's really no one else that could take Hulk Hogan's spot. For all that you may hear about the politicking, or all that you may hear about the creative control and the things that don't work for me, brother, Hulk Hogan was given the ball and he was allowed to run with it. He had the championship for 3 years in the mid-'80s. He got it for another year after that in the late '80s. He initially started out as a heel doing squash matches, but after defeating Antonio Inoki to become the first IWGP tournament winner, he came back to the WWF, and within months he was the WWF champion. Took that off of Iron Sheik. That was just a transitional thing, but they gave it to him to run with. He held the championship for 1,474 days. He defended it 173 times. He eventually lost to Andre, as we talked about. Andre only had the belt for a month, and then it was vacated. Hogan got it back as soon as he could a year later at WrestleMania. And then he held it for another year before he lost it to Warrior. All of wrestling was centered around either Hogan had the champion, or Hogan was the championship, or Hogan was passing the torch. Hogan was the guy, or the guy to make the guy. There's no debate about that. I don't know. We all have emotional moments about Hogan and the little Hulkamaniacs, and I was the littlest Hulkamaniac, the tiniest Hulkamaniac. I said my prayers and I took my vitamins and I believed in myself.
Of course, I was a young child at the heyday of the 80s when he was at the peak of the world. And I truly, when I believed in wrestling and when I saw him got beat and when he got that energy and he hulked up, I believed it, and I got so emotional when he would come back and win. All was right with the world when Hogan won a match. When he lost the few times he did, it was so heartbreaking. It didn't make sense to me as a child. So even though I believed it was real, it still didn't make sense to me. This guy who could hulk up, why is he losing, right? So it was a bit of a weird conundrum.
He was Superman. They gave him kayfabe immunity. Didn't matter who it was coming at him. It didn't matter, what they threw at him. He was able to take all of their blows and take all of that negativity, and he was still able to come out as the victor. And to us, I think with all great cartoons or all great children's stories, it does not matter what the bad guy throws at you. The good guy still wins. And that was the Hulk Hogan story over and over again. As you become older, you look back at those things and you just go, oh my God, when is Hulk going to finally lose? He's been winning for 5 years or 3 years or 10 years. The way that they were going then and the marketing that they were doing to children at that time, that was exactly what we needed. It was a storybook. He had sort of countless gigantic enemies thrown at him over and over again, hundreds of times, 150 times. He defended that championship before he lost it to Andre. He beat Andre a dozen times before he eventually lost it to Andre. And there was some shadiness about that kind of thing. And in the meantime, you know what he was doing? He was leaving to be in Rocky 3. And he was leaving to do, what was the other movie he did? He did Holds Barred.
I must have as a kid, maybe. I feel like I did.
The reasons why he would lose the championship and why we would be shocked, it's because he needed to leave for a little while to do a movie.
Yeah, well, it's behind the scenes stuff a kid doesn't know about. But then when he just started doing his movie run, I was well into not watching wrestling. I even thought it was embarrassing that Hogan was doing stuff like Mr. Nanny and Suburban Commando and Thunder in Paradise. I was not watching wrestling at all during these moments. In my mind's eye, and probably in the wrestling's eye, it was over. The heyday was over.
I was 10 years later. That's how I felt when The Rock did that shit.
There you go. Interesting.
If I said, this is my hero, this is the guy that I feel the closest to, he's just leaving to do this, the cameo in The Mummy or whatever it was he was doing. Little did he know he would become the absolute biggest thing in Hollywood ever.
Right. That's crazy.
Sacrifice a few months in the WWF. It was well worth it in the long scheme. But Hulk Hogan was inspirational. He was bigger than wrestling. rock and wrestling on MTV, his different movie aspirations. There's no reason why he wouldn't be number one of the 80s. There's really no reason why he wouldn't be number one of, you couldn't argue against him being number one on people's list of all time because he's Hulk Hogan. He's synonymous with the industry.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He is what he is. And he's only 66, which is weird. So back in the Attitude Era, which was 20 years ago, was 2000. Even then, that was like late days NWO. He was only 46.
Isn't it funny? Because the funny thing is right now, you know how old Chris Jericho is?
How old?
Chris Jericho's pushing 50. AJ Styles? AJ Styles has been 40s.
That's weird because everyone was saying Hogan was washed up and old when he was 46, but that's not old.
Hogan got injured several times. When Hogan got injured, he got 1980s back repair, right? He got some pretty stiff boards and screws stuck into his back and his neck. That's not the way we do it these days. So Hogan, well, he was a benefit and he was a victim of his time. When they went to fix Hulk Hogan from falling on his back on those concrete rings for 10 years, they fixed him with some really stiff screws or something of the sort. And it's always interesting to look back and find out how these wrestlers, look upon that and how they think about that and how they talk about that.
Right. I know there's a lot that we didn't talk about. This is an episode that will deal with all the incidents, all the stories, but it's thousands. And like we said, there are podcasts literally just dedicated to the wrestling world. And we just barely not even scratched the surface. We haven't even pulled our hand out of our pocket to even touch the surface.
You said it.
But I think we did some good.
Yeah.
You did an excellent job, and I thank you. I really do. I do thank you for your research and for your input. As a guest host, you more than adequately fulfilled your role. And I hope our listeners enjoyed your discussion. I learned some things I haven't heard before, and I hope some other listeners did too. But that being said, there is somebody that might be the worst out of this top 10. And what are your reasons for that worst?
Did you play the last Hulk Hogan promo?
We'll do that right now.
Let's do it right now.
Okay.
Champion of the world in the locker room, just 1 hour away from his moment of destiny.
Well, they said it was my last ride, man. Yesterday when I finished hanging and banging, when I jumped on the Harley, man, as I went through the intersection, as I headed for the mountains, some of the non-believers in the gym said, "See you later, Hulkster, man. This is your last ride." Ain't you alive, brothers? When I felt the fury, as I ripped, as I tore the shirt, as I headed for the sunset, man, I looked down, brothers, and as the sun beamed off the gold in my eyes, I realized that sooner or later, you gotta live and die and you gotta face the truth. And for you, Andre the Giant, it's time to face the truth, brother. Because when I think about what you and I have to do, man, what I have to do is nothing. All I have to do is merely beat a 7'4", 550-pound giant. But Andre, you gotta face the truth, brother. In its purest form, man. The purest truth there is, man. The training, the saying, the prayers, the eating, the vitamins. And to beat me, man, you gotta beat every Hulkamaniac, every little Hulkster in the world, everyone that plays it straight, all the ones that don't take any shortcuts, brother. And they usually say, if the dirty air don't get you, the politicians will. But in this case, it's gonna be Hulkamania. And the reason it's gonna get you, man, it's the purest form of the truth there is. And I can't wait to see you go down at the feet of Hulkamania in front of 90,000 plus in the Silver Dome. What you gonna do, Andre the Giant, when the real truth, the 24-inch pythons and Hulkamania runs wild on you?
That one's so good. That one's right before WrestleMania 3. It hits all the high notes. It's just the best form of euphoria. Getting into who we've dealt with in the top 10, we've got your Bundy, your Piper,
Ventura
and Sheik and Flair,
Rhodes, Warrior,
Hogan, Warrior,
Savage, of course.
Yeah, of course. And we've talked about who is sort of the objective best, who is our subjective favorite.
Right.
Guys are at the top. Nobody's going to make those the worst.
No.
And then we sort of spent some time on a sidetrack that was completely not wrestling, and this is the guy I'm going with. I don't know how this list got put together. This guy's got no titles. This guy only really wrestled half of the decade. I know he's got significance in the world today, But Jesse Ventura is the worst of the 80s of this list.
Yeah,
of this list. Jesse Ventura is not our guy. He was impressive, probably can fill the airtime like I can. No, he didn't do anything for me. His career in the 80s was cut short, and he didn't really accomplish anything during it. He didn't main event a WrestleMania like King Kong Bundy. He didn't main event a WrestleMania like Roddy Piper. And he didn't have the championship like Iron Sheik. So I think this is a pretty easy answer. It's Ventura.
I like it. I don't always agree. Sometimes it's not as fun when we do agree. Yeah, I think as far as wrestling goes, he's had a more interesting life outside the ring, which isn't necessarily a good thing. His life outside the ring is silly, but
at best.
but it's interesting enough that I'd rather talk about his conspiracy theories than about his wrestling career, because I think even as a wrestler he wasn't that great. I think he was just a showman. Well, they all are, but you know what I mean? He wasn't even that great of a wrestler. He was a fairly okay commentator, but Jerry Lawler and Jim Ross are much better. He's popular, he's well known, but he's out of these guys, I would rather watch any other wrestling match than a Jesse wrestling match.
And right on.
Yeah. All right, brother. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And remember, in front of every silver lining, there's a cloud, and we're here to help you find it. Thank you so much, Drew, for coming on and schooling us on the hard knocks of wrestling, and appreciate it. I could tell it's your passion, and thank you. You're a perfect guest host for this topic.
Well, it wasn't hard times, Daddy. It wasn't hard times.
Thanks, brother, for coming on. And I was not fading out. I was listening. I was just resting my eyes.